This then was the single greatest airplane disaster ever to hit the air capital, where hundreds of takeoffs and landings are accomplished routinely every day.
These were 7 men who were serving their country that morning and encountered an unfortunate mechanical malfunction on the plane, causing it to crash.
Historian and author David Carter became fascinated with the crash while he was serving in the Air Force stationed at McConnell in 2003. Carter's years of research are documented in his recent book, Mayday Over Wichita.
This was an accident, unmitigated disaster.
After the smoke and heat cleared, as many parts and pieces as could be found were taken to Tinker Air Force Base at Oklahoma City for reconstruction.
But this disaster left little material evidence to determine a cause. Virtually nothing was left of the plane that was recognizable.
It was a challenge for the Air Force. You know, they started out with a 50-man team, and they go into the PIATT Street site and they scour the site looking for evidence of the crash. It was a meticulous job. These Air Force investigators combined with Boeing were detectives. You have to look at it that way. And they scour this site, this crash site. They put together these pieces that they can find, including the engines and a bit of the crumpled tail section.
Just 3 days after the crash, reports surfaced of a parachute found entangled in the wreckage of one of the engines. That led to speculation which the Air Force attempted to immediately put to rest.
The parachute reportedly attached to one of the jet engines of the KC-135, which crashed in Wichita Saturday, was upon investigation at Oklahoma City's Tinker Air Force Base found to be pieces of parachute nylon cord. These cords became entangled on portions of the aft section of the engine as it was extracted from the ground during salvage operations, and thus could not have contributed to the accident.
Nevertheless, to this day, aviation websites suggest that was a jet fighter drag chute left on the runway which got sucked into one of the engines upon takeoff, fatally crippling the plane. In reality, investigators determined it was an emergency parachute that had been on board Raggy 42. A crew member had apparently attempted to use it to bail out of the plane as it was going down. Instead, the investigation pointed in a different direction.
It had a nickname Raggy 42 for good reason. There were several write-ups, several maintenance write-ups on this airplane.
In fact, Carter says the plane was not supposed to be at McConnell in the first place.
The plane was initially supposed to head into Southeast Asia, but due to the boom malfunctioning on the rear end of the plane, they were diverted and they headed to McConnell to work those kinks out.
But the refueling boom wasn't the plane's fatal flaw. 10 months after the crash, the Air Force issued an official accident report. However, Carter says this report had been lost for decades because of a fire at the Disaster Research Center in Delaware. Only after repeated Freedom of Information requests was Carter able to get a copy of the lost report. It states the cause of the crash to be a rudder control system malfunction of such magnitude as to compromise control of the aircraft and preclude proper corrective action by the pilots in the short time available.
They examined the radio traffic from the pilots, and they also examined that tail section, and they were able to determine that the autopilot malfunctioned to some degree and caused the rudder to jam, which ultimately crashed the plane.
Carter's research uncovered that earlier that week, the crew had reported the autopilot and rudder were malfunctioning, though these problems were considered minor.
So that would not have stopped the captain from proceeding on with the mission because it didn't seem like it was going to impair what they were trying to do. A basic refueling mission is what they were trying to do. It would not have hindered their basic operations. It just so happens that ultimately it became more severe as the flight went on. The autopilot does just that. It pilots the plane so that the pilots can be set on a straight course, almost like your car when you set cruise control. The rudder in and of itself moves back and forth, so it controls where the nose of that plane is going to go.
And in this case, with no control, that nose took a dive straight down at 20th and PIATT. Lives lost, homes destroyed, a disaster unlike Kansas had ever seen.